As a hostage in Beirut, I was a victim of an ancient conflict over the ownership of the land of Israel. While I was there, I read the Bible through twice, which gave me comfort in some ways, but left me with a lot of questions. This was the basic text of the struggle going on, and it seems rather important to find out if the bits that look like the real history of the Israelites and the Promised Land are actually true. It's a search that leads to some of the most mysterious archaeological finds ever made. Scholars are arguing that the history of early Israel is a fairy story, and that means that this huge structure may belong in the world of myth, not reality. But I'll be coming to that later. What I've discovered so far is that there's something wrong with the story. No walls tumbled at Jericho in the 13th century BC, the time of Joshua. The city had been destroyed and abandoned centuries earlier. The only city that seems to have been destroyed in a way that connects with the Bible is at Hatzor.
And they smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe, and Joshua burnt Hatzor with fire.
The archaeological record shows the fire, but what the Bible doesn't mention is that Canaan was ruled by Egypt at the time. And the Egyptian records say that Pharaoh Seti attacked Hatzor. If Joshua turned up there later, he may have missed the main event.
We know that Seti I, around 1300, destroyed Hatzor because he claims in a famous inscription having done so. Now, is this the end of Hatzor? The real fire of Hatzor, and centuries later the Israelites claimed the victory and said, we did it? It's a possibility.
We don't actually have any archaeological evidence for Joshua. We don't really have any archaeological evidence for a conquest in the way that it's depicted in the Bible. So they didn't come from Egypt in the Exodus, as is depicted in the biblical narrative.
Unless they came from Egypt and settled peacefully. Although the book of Joshua describes the conquest of Canaan, another book of the Bible, the book of Judges, says something rather different.
If you read the book of Joshua and then read the following book, the book of Judges, it seems as if you're dealing with two very different histories of the same event. Joshua has this amazing sudden attack and everything is conquered and distributed. In Judges, they're up in the hill country and they can't get down to the plains because there's too many military obstacles in the way.
Israel consists of a flat strip of land along the coast, then rises into hill country as you travel east. The cities that Joshua is supposed to have conquered, but apparently didn't, were cities of the plain. But never mind. According to the book of Judges, the Israelite invaders from Egypt were up in the hill country. Although the map of the biblical kingdom may have been the inspiration for modern Israel, the state created in 1948 did not include the hill country. But Israel took over that land in the War of 1967, and Israeli archaeologists made startling new discoveries there, not by digging, but by surveying the land.
I was an officer in the Israeli army, and I was injured near the Suez Canal, and I was more than a year in a hospital, and then I recovered on a wheelchair and finally with the crutches. But that, I believe, became kind of a challenge to me.
And it keeps you going?
It keeps me going. And also the curiosity, really, to know if all the Bible, which is so important all over, is it true historically or untrue?
Adam Zertol and his team have been painstakingly surveying the hills of the West Bank every Friday for over 20 years.
Well, the art of surveying, I call it art because it's art and science together. It's to concentrate on the ground and look for the little tiny pieces of pottery or even flint tools. And by that we can locate the period by these little tiny pieces, you know. The way we start, we just spread all over on the territory and raise any little tiny piece of pottery you see.
Adam, look what I found.
Oh, that's a marking on a handle. It's very nice and that.
I actually found it quite hard to tell what was a stone and what a fragment of pottery. But to the expert eye, these fragments can be read like a book. That's quite a hoard.
Yes, but it is all of it. All this quantity is from the Iron Age. Okay, let's go on. Let's explore. There's an architecture appearing here. This is a kind of a wall.
Oh, yeah.
And closer wall. And more pottery. Please come up here, everybody. Come on, everybody. I think we've just discovered the site here.
Fantastic.
Okay, that what you see like a pile of big rocks
Yeah.
is a typical enclosure wall surrounding the early Iron Age site. And that is just been discovered here. The evidence we've found of more than 200 sites is that this area was absolutely empty in the late Canaanite period, which is 14th, 13th century. And it has been filled up with new sites. We can trace a movement from east to west, exactly how the Bible explains the entrance through the Jordan into the hill country of Canaan.
Adam Zertel's survey is part of a revolution in our knowledge of biblical history. One of these new hill country sites has been excavated. The excavator, Israel Finkelstein, took me to see it. He hadn't been back for 20 years.
Do you recognize the site, Israel?
Very difficult. I must sound like an old-timer now, telling you that there was nothing here. This was a hill overlooking the coastal plain. It was very quiet and peaceful. And now, I mean, look around, the buildings and the highway, everywhere. It's unbelievable. Well, this is a village from the period of the rise of early Israel, a village which was inhabited by about 100 people. This is the central building of the village, if you wish. This is the house of the sheikh. The first settlement at the site was some sort of an oval camp. It looked like this. It's about 100 meters across, not more than that. Yeah. In the middle there was an open court with a few silos, but no more than that. Now, this kind of settlement, when you have an open court like this, is, I think, a clue that the people had many animals. They were pastoral people, and then they became agriculturalists. Now, when we are looking at societies in the world today, in the Middle East, which still go through this process, we see something very interesting. That when they go through this process, which is a gradual one, they tend, in the first stage of the sedentary agricultural village life, to keep the traditions of the tent and tent encampment of their former pastoral way of life.
In the next stage of the site, this building was erected. This seems to be a new kind of house, a design unknown in the country before these settlements began. And the Israelis consider it so important they built a reconstruction of it. Perhaps we really have found the first homes of the Israelites. And there's something else new as well.
In the highlands, we see something quite surprising. Pig bones disappear altogether from the archaeological record, which means we have them before and we'll have them also later. But in that period of time, in the Iron Age, in the time of biblical Israel, if you wish, they disappear. At the same time, in the lowlands, not only that we have bones, pig bones, we have a lot of them.
Jewish law forbids eating animals which are not kosher, most specifically pigs. It's okay, they're not religious police. It is surprising to see echoes of a kosher diet in these settlements, which suddenly appeared when the Bible says the Israelites arrived from Egypt.
I think because we have pig bones before and later, there's no way but to say that these people took a decision not to take out pork from their kitchen.
So these were the ancient Israelites coming with their flocks of sheep and goats from Egypt?
Well, not at all. They were what? They were probably Canaanites.
Ouch. Just when I was sure we had found the biblical Israelites, I'm told no, people in these new settlements had come not as slaves from Egypt, but had moved here from other places in Canaan. Their pottery is Canaanite. The Israelites seem to have disappeared completely.
It's odd. Even when things on the ground, destroyed cities, people who don't eat pork, seem to fit with what the Bible says, the experts say that that's just a coincidence. What people have been telling me is that the Bible's history of the 12th century BC was actually written down hundreds of years later.
In a sense, to ask the archaeological questions behind them is a bit like trying to read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and writing a book about the history of the Roman Empire. It's a later creation using older materials to make a certain point. And therefore, how you go from that to the real history and the archaeological evidence is very difficult.
There is a contemporary record of a military force entering Canaan from Egypt. It's not a force of Israelites led by Moses and Joshua. It's a force of Egyptians led by Pharaoh. Egypt ruled Canaan, and Ramesses II's successor, Merneptah, crushed disobedience in Canaan around 1207 BC. He was very thorough.
Canaan is plundered with every evil. Ashkelon is stripped. Gaza is seized.
So what about the Israelites? Were there any? You bet there were. They were already living in Canaan.
The Israelites are laid waste. Their seed is gone.
And this broken fragment is the only picture that exists of ancient Israelites. Not humiliating Pharaoh and conquering Canaan, but being crushed beneath the hooves of Egyptian horses. So there really were Israelites, but we seem to know nothing at all about them. Who were they? Perhaps the Bible is a work of fiction. According to an Egyptian pharaoh in about 1200 BCE, there were people living in these hills called Israelites. It was the first time they'd been mentioned, and he said he wiped them out. Apart from what it says in the Bible, they're not mentioned again by anyone for the next 350 years. Where did these people come from? What's their origin?
Well, first of all, they were indigenous to this country. We are not speaking about people who come from outside.
The Canaanites' chief god was called El, and Israel is a Canaanite word meaning El fighter. Perhaps they were Canaanite patriots who had taken to the hills and not foreign invaders. So to sum up, the people who came to live in this hill country were Canaanites. They came up into this hill country area. We've no idea of what their religion was. Presumably they were pagans. There was no conquest.
Yes, basically this is the story.
But is there any real proof that the Israelites were actually native-born Canaanites rather than escaped slaves from Egypt? I was wondering whether you found human bones in your excavations. It occurs to me that with modern DNA testing you could make a clear identification of the ancient Israelites.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's no human bones. In the early Israelite sites, no cemeteries and no human bones has ever been found. That's one of the biggest mysteries of biblical archaeology. Why no human bones of the early Israelite time?
Further research revealed that this is not quite true, but we can't reveal our informant.
Well, the bones were there. We have an awful lot of skeletal material from that period here in Israel. If there is anybody today who is carrying out this research, I'm positive that they are not willing to speak about it publicly.
Why would that be?
Over the years, the archaeological community has suffered tremendously because of religious fanaticism.
Disgusting, disgraceful archaeologists. Rot, your bones should rot. Your family should rot. Your kids should get cancer and drop dead because you are doing disgraceful things to our forefathers.
Anyone who disturbs the bones of the dead is immediately marked out as a target. It may be too dangerous to touch the bones of the dead, but the blood of the ancient Israelites and Canaanites ought still to run in the veins of the living, and they can be examined. At Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, they are investigating whether today's Jews and Palestinians might both be descended from one group of people.
Every male has the Y chromosome of his father, his grandfather, great-grandfather, along all the generations. Our research has focused on the Arabs who live in this area, the Israeli and Palestinian Arabs, and we try to see what is the relationship to the Jews.
They found that Arabs descend from a single ancestral chromosome on their father's side, but that the line of descent is broken in some places. Then they looked at Jewish DNA, and there they found the lines of paternal descent that neatly filled in the gaps in the Arabs' heritage. So basically the two populations that have originated in the Middle East are fit together. There are, if you like, deep ancestral links between them.
Yeah, that's very clear from our research that they all fit very closely together. We never suspected that the genetic affinity is so close between these two populations.
Palestinian Arabs see themselves as directly descended from the biblical Canaanites. This discovery that they share a genetic heritage with modern Jews seems to connect with the idea that Israelites and Canaanites were the same people. Some Palestinians say that that makes them the true inheritors of any Israelite claim to the land.
Khaled, looking out over this landscape, it's like the pictures I had in my Bible as a child. One has the feeling that perhaps nothing has changed over thousands of years.
If you want to understand the Old Testament or the old scriptures, you have to study the daily life of the Palestinians. Here you have some pots, 2 pots. This one is modern. This is produced by Muhammad Yunus, the potter here in Jabba. And this one is dated 900 BC, from the so-called, if you want, Israelite period. You know? This tradition has continued over the years. If you want to consider Israelites as Canaanites, it's fine with me, you know. But for me, all of this is Palestinian tradition.
So, Israelites and Canaanites have become interchangeable, but only so long as there is no hard evidence outside the Bible itself that the Israelites did invade the land. And that brings me to a very strange sight indeed.
So we came here after surveying Mount Bal for about 2 months. It's a huge mountain of about 18 square kilometers. And then we came one sunny day in April to that site here with a barren place of rocks and stones, in the middle of which we found this pile of stones, big pile of stones. But what was very attractive to us that we found here many potsherds of the beginning of Israelite settlement, time of Moses and Joshua. So we began to uncover this pile of stones that was a kind of a mystery. We did not know what there is there, but we could see some walls emerging from that pile of stones. Now, what we found was a very complicated structure of large unhewn stones, which is very important.
Unhewn, yeah?
Unhewn stones with kind of installations full of ashes with bones.
Then Joshua built an altar to Yahweh the God of Israel on Mount Bal, an altar of whole stones over which no man hath lifted up any iron. And they offered thereon burnt offerings to Yahweh, and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel.
When we sent those bones to the university at Jerusalem for check, they were very surprised because all the bones belonged to kosher animals, which appear on the Bible, in the early Bible, as permitted for sacrifice.
So presumably no pig bones?
No pig bones, no donkeys, no camels, no things like this, only kosher animals. And surprisingly enough, also they were all burned. So, which means, of course, sacrifice.
Is it always as windy as this up here?
Yes, very windy. We deal here with an altar, a big altar with kosher animals and sacrifices and whatever. And then when we came to the book of Joshua, we have here a detailed description of a very great ceremony where all the Israel were present. And this is more or less what we found here.
Has it changed your view of the Bible as being a collection of myths into something more real and positive history?
As a scientist, as a rationalist, as an archaeologist, I refuse to accept the fact. It was very hard to me. So finally I had to surrender. And I think it somehow freed me, liberated me from that preconception that the Bible, the early Bible, is all mythology, all collection of legends.
Other scholars are uncomfortable with this identification of Joshua's altar. The problem isn't with this site, but with the story. In the 620s BC, King Josiah wanted to reform worship in Jerusalem, and it looks as though the Book of Joshua was produced at this time.
Apparently, this same circle of scribes and teachers who supported Josiah and his reform decided that this was also the time to survey the entire history of the life of the Israelites in the land, from Joshua through Josiah.
They also said that they had found a scroll of God's teaching. This seems to have been the Book of Deuteronomy. It was evidently unknown until they produced it. According to the prophet Jeremiah, they were faking history.
Why do you say we have the law of Yahweh? Look at it. It's a pack of lies from the lying pen of scribes.
Moses' instructions to build the altar and what to do there are in the Book of Deuteronomy, which scholars don't think was written until 600 years after Joshua's day.
The early part of Joshua describes Joshua as loyal to the book of Deuteronomy, which is a book that really in his day wasn't even around.
But does that mean it never happened? Amnon Ben-Tor, excavating at Hatzor, is convinced that the authors of the Bible used historical records.
Even if we think that everything was written down in the 7th century, which it wasn't, these people were not just writing fiction. They had data in their hands.
Thousands of ancient letters and financial records have been found in the Near East, written in a script called cuneiform. Some of them mention a ruler of Hatzor called Yavin, the name of the king of Hatzor in the book of Joshua.
Yavin is a very strange name. Nobody, it doesn't appear again. How could they know? There was only one such person here at Hatzor, and we know because he is mentioned in an archive in cuneiform. How did they know such a name?
They knew that there was a king Yavin at Hatzor, but they evidently did not know that he cannot have been Joshua's enemy because he died 500 years earlier. That story can't be true. And that may also apply to the biggest story of all. Jerusalem is supposed to have become the capital city of David around 1000 BC. So why are archaeologists saying there is no trace of that city?